if anyone had bothered to compile a comprehensive list of galactic achievements, sandwiched somewhere between faster-than-light travel and artificial gravity would be this dubious accomplishment. Every civilization capable of leaving their home planet had somehow managed to make eating the most tedious part of existence. This wasn't some According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Utopian conspiracy or authoritarian decree. No sinister overlords had banned flavor. Nobody had outlawed spices or criminalized seasoning. The galaxy had simply evolved past the primitive need to make food interesting. Nutritional science had peaked approximately 3,000 years ago when the Velcrin Collective perfected the formula for complete sustenance paste, a beige substance with the consistency of wet cement and the flavor profile of absolutely nothing whatsoever. Other species had developed their own variations naturally. The Kicks preferred theirs slightly more gelatinous. The Thornbacks added mineral supplements that made it crunch like sand. But the principle remained universal. Food was fuel, nothing more, and treating it as anything else was the mark of a primitive society still enslaved by its animal brain. The human, currently residing in Habitat Module 7 of the research station designated Kepler 993, had opinions about this philosophy. Strong opinions. The kind of opinions that involved creative profanity in 3 languages and at least one hand gesture that would start a war on 5 different worlds. She stood in her assigned quarters, which the station's automated systems had optimized for maximum efficiency and minimum personality. The walls were that particular shade of off-white that suggested someone had tried to invent a color more boring than beige, and succeeded. The sleeping platform was ergonomically perfect and about as comfortable as sleeping on a particularly firm cloud of disappointment. The nutrition dispensary in the corner hummed with the quiet confidence of a machine that had never experienced joy and didn't plan to start now. Next to the dispensary, shoved into a corner and partially hidden behind a portable atmospheric recycler, sat a collection of items that would have made the station's safety inspector physically ill if they'd known about them. A compact heating unit, jury-rigged from 3 different power sources and held together with the kind of optimism that engineers call reckless and humans call Tuesday. Several metal containers of various sizes, a collection of dried plant matter in sealed containers, each labeled in human script with words like basil and oregano and things the translator couldn't even begin to parse. And most damning of all, a small refrigeration unit that absolutely, definitely, 100% should not have been aboard a station where every gram of cargo was logged, tracked, and accounted for. The human had been aboard Kepler 993 for approximately 4 months, which in galactic research terms meant she'd barely finished the introductory phase of her assignment. She was there as part of some grand initiative about cultural exchange and shared knowledge and all those other pretty words that organizations used when they meant we need to figure out what makes these weird newcomers tick before they do something that breaks physics again. Humans had that effect on the galactic community. They'd gone from discovering fire to splitting atoms in what the rest of the galaxy considered a suspiciously short time frame, and they'd done it all while apparently refusing to accept that some things were simply impossible, like making food that tasted good, for instance. The other residents of her habitat module were Felnic, a species that resembled what would happen if someone took an Earth cat, scaled it up to roughly human size, gave it opposable thumbs, and taught it advanced astrophysics. Their fur ranged from deep auburn to silver gray. Their eyes were proportionally enormous and adapted for low-light environments, and their cubs, those younger than 20 standard years, still retained many of the behaviors that made their distant ancestors successful ambush predators. Currently, 3 of those cubs lived in the module. Not because they were her responsibility. The galaxy would never be that cruel to assign childcare to someone who'd barely figured out the station's shower controls, but because their parents worked in the adjacent research wing and the habitat assignments had been determined by an algorithm that valued efficiency over sanity. The cubs were enrolled in the station's educational program, which meant they spent their days learning about quantum mechanics and xenobiology, and how to properly format a research proposal in 17 different linguistic structures. They were, by all objective measures, brilliant young minds destined for greatness in their chosen fields. They were also children, which meant they were curious about absolutely everything, especially the things they'd been told not to be curious about. The human had noticed them watching her, not obviously because Felnic cubs were genetically programmed to be subtle about their observations. It was a holdover from the days when staring at your prey too intently meant it would bolt and you'd go hungry. But she'd catch glimpses of large eyes peering around corners, see the flick of a tail disappearing when she turned around, hear the whispered conversations that cut off abruptly when she entered a common area. They were fascinated by her, which was fair, because she was equally fascinated by living alongside species that had evolved on completely different worlds, under completely different selection pressures. The difference was that she was a trained researcher who understood professional boundaries and appropriate social conduct. They were kids with fur who thought the weird alien in their habitat was better than anything on the entertainment feeds. The human checked her chronometer, a habit she'd never quite broken despite the station operating on a 26-hour cycle that made her circadian rhythm weep. The cubs would be in their educational session for another 3 hours. The other adult residents were all on duty in their respective departments. She had the habitat module essentially to herself, which was as close to privacy as one could achieve on a station where atmospheric recyclers monitored air quality every 30 seconds, and someone always needed to know where everyone else was in case of emergency decompression. It was, in other words, the perfect time to commit what the galactic community would probably classify as a cultural crime. She was going to cook, not heat up, not rehydrate, not squeeze another serving of nutritionally complete sadness from the dispensary and pretend it was a meal. Actually cook, with heat and ingredients and techniques that humans had been perfecting since someone's distant ancestor had accidentally dropped something in a fire and discovered that burnt tasted better than raw. The human pulled out her contraband equipment with the care of someone defusing a bomb, which wasn't entirely inaccurate given that she'd bypassed approximately 14 safety protocols to get it aboard. The heating unit came to life with a soft hum that she immediately worried was too loud. The metal container, which someone from Earth would recognize as a pot, even if no one else in the galaxy would, went on top. She added water from the reclamation tap, waited for it to heat, and then began the ritual. Dried pasta, smuggled aboard in a container labeled Human Cultural Artifacts, because technically it wasn't a lie. Vegetables she'd been growing in hydroponics under the pretense of studying human agricultural techniques. A protein source that she'd carefully logged as biological research samples. And spices, those precious concentrations of flavor that the galaxy had forgotten existed, measured out with the precision of someone who knew this might be her only chance to eat real food for months. The habitat module's atmospheric sensors immediately began having what could only be described as an existential crisis. Temperature readings spiked. Chemical composition readings showed compounds that the database flagged as unusual, but not hazardous. Humidity levels fluctuated as steam rose from the heating unit. And the smell. Oh, the smell began spreading through the ventilation system like the galaxy's most delicious act of biological warfare. Somewhere in the educational wing, 3 Felnic cubs simultaneously stopped paying attention to their lesson on exoplanetary mineral composition and lifted their noses to the air, their pupils dilating as ancient instincts whispered that something interesting was happening and they should probably investigate immediately. The human stirred her pot with the focused intensity of someone performing surgery, which wasn't far from the truth considering she was operating contraband, equipment in a sterile research environment. The pasta swirled in boiling water, and she added her carefully hoarded ingredients with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Garlic, because no human dish felt complete without it. Tomatoes that she'd babied in hydroponics for 2 months. Herbs that made the translator software give up entirely and just display question marks. Station sensors were now actively panicking in that polite, automated way that meant somewhere an alert had probably flagged her module as experiencing an atmospheric anomaly. The air circulation system, designed to maintain perfect environmental homeostasis, had absolutely no context for what to do with the smell of sautéing garlic and simmering tomato sauce. It registered the compounds, cross-referenced them with its database of known substances, found nothing alarming, and settled into a state of confused compliance. The sauce bubbled. The human added a pinch of something green and crumbly. The universe remained intact, despite what galactic food safety regulations would have predicted. 3 floors down, in Educational Pod Theta 7, the instructor was attempting to explain the mathematical principles behind gravitational wave detection to a class of young Felnic students who were suddenly, inexplicably, no longer interested in gravitational wave detection. The eldest cub, barely 16 standard years and still sporting the spotted pattern that marked pre-adolescence, had gone completely still. Their ears swiveled independently, trying to isolate a sensation that wasn't quite sound. The middle cub, all gangly limbs and adolescent awkwardness, had abandoned any pretense of paying attention and was now staring at the ventilation grate with the fixed intensity of a predator who just spotted movement in tall grass. The youngest, only 12 and still possessing the kitten-soft features that made adults coo inappropriately, raised one paw with the careful precision of someone trying not to draw attention. Yes, the instructor, a patient individual who'd been teaching for 40 years and thought they'd seen everything, acknowledged the gesture. "May I be excused to the hygiene facility?" Before the instructor could respond, the other 2 cubs had their paws raised. "I also need to visit the hygiene facility." "Me as well. Urgent biological necessity." The instructor's whiskers twitched in what might have been suspicion or resignation, or possibly both. "All 3 of you? Simultaneously?" 3 heads nodded with synchronized innocence that was immediately suspicious. "Very well. Return promptly." The cubs evacuated the classroom with the kind of casual speed that suggested they were absolutely not running but were definitely moving with purpose. They hit the corridor and the pretense evaporated entirely. 3 young Felnic, trained from birth in proper station conduct and appropriate behavior in shared spaces, abandoned all decorum and bolted toward the residential modules with their noses lifted and their pupils blown wide. "What is that?" the youngest whispered, which was unnecessary because they were now alone in the corridor and moving too fast for whispering to be practical. "I don't know, but it's coming from our module." The eldest had taken point, their longer legs eating up the distance while their siblings scrambled to keep pace. "It smells like... The middle cub trailed off, lacking the vocabulary for something their species hadn't experienced in evolutionary memory. "Like food is supposed to smell," the eldest finished, which made absolutely no sense because food didn't smell like anything. Food was paste. Food was nutritionally complete and thermally neutral and utterly, completely devoid of any olfactory presence whatsoever. Except this wasn't. This was something else entirely, something that bypassed their rational, educated minds and spoke directly to whatever part of their brain still remembered that eating could be more than just fuel intake. The smell grew stronger as they approached their habitat module, and with it came something they hadn't felt before. Hunger that wasn't just an empty tank notification from their metabolism, but actual, genuine, desperate want. The door chime announced visitors with a kind of polite electronic courtesy that assumed everyone wanted company. The human, elbow deep in her highly illegal culinary operation, froze like a criminal caught mid-heist, which, given the station's regulations about unauthorized food preparation, wasn't entirely inaccurate. She considered ignoring it, pretending she wasn't home, claiming sudden deafness, but the atmospheric sensors had already logged her presence, and the door would open automatically if someone claimed emergency circumstances, and explaining why she was hiding from visitors while clearly being home would raise more questions than just answering the door. With the resigned sigh of someone whose perfect crime had been interrupted, she covered the pot and opened the door. 3 Felnic cubs stood in the corridor, and each one held their standard-issue nutrition bowl with both paws like tiny pilgrims presenting offerings at a shrine. Their ears were forward, their tails straight up, and their eyes had that slightly glazed quality that suggested higher brain functions had temporarily vacated the premises. The human stared at them. They stared back. The universe, finding this standoff amusing, offered no guidance. "Can I help you?" She tried to keep her tone neutral, professional, the kind of voice that suggested nothing unusual was happening in her quarters, and there definitely wasn't a pot of contraband pasta sauce still simmering behind her. The eldest cub's nose twitched. "We smelled something." "Did you?" Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the flat effect of someone who just realized their covert operation had been compromised by children with superior olfactory senses. "We brought bowls," the middle cub offered helpfully, lifting theirs slightly as if the human might have missed this detail. "I can see that." "Is it food?" The youngest's voice carried the kind of desperate hope usually reserved for people asking if rescue ships were coming. The human looked at the three cubs, at their bowls, at their faces radiating innocent expectation mixed with something that looked disturbingly like the expression dogs made when humans ate anything remotely edible. She looked back at her quarters, where her dinner, her one chance at eating something that didn't taste like flavored sadness, sat waiting. She looked back at the cubs. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." But she stepped aside anyway, because apparently humans had a genetic defect that made them physically incapable of refusing to feed young creatures who showed up looking hopeful. The cubs filed in with the careful reverence of pilgrims entering sacred ground, their noses working overtime as they tracked the source of the smell that had derailed their entire education session. They gathered around the heating unit like it was a campfire, and they were hearing ghost stories. The human lifted the lid, and the resulting wave of garlic tomato herb-infused steam hit them with enough force that all three cubs swayed slightly. "What is it?" the eldest breathed. "Pasta, with sauce. It's just dinner." Just dinner. Just the culmination of 4 months of planning, ingredient smuggling, and carefully timed preparation. Just the one meal she'd been looking forward to since arriving on this station where everything tasted like beige, felt like a texture. Just dinner that she was apparently about to share with 3 alien children who'd brought bowls like she was running a soup kitchen. The human portioned out her dinner with the grim efficiency of someone dividing resources during a siege. 3 bowls for unexpected guests, 1 significantly smaller portion for herself, and the slow acceptance that her evening had taken a turn she absolutely had not planned for. The cubs watched every movement like it was performance art, their tails swishing in unconscious synchronization. "It's hot," she warned, handing over the first bowl. "Let it cool, or you'll burn your tongue." The eldest cub accepted their portion with trembling paws, stared at the actual visible pieces of food suspended in actual sauce with actual color, and made a sound that the translator tried to render as overwhelmed gratitude, but came out more like a dying computer. "What do we do with it?" the middle cub asked, holding their bowl like it might explode. "You eat it. With this." She produced utensils, because watching someone try to drink pasta seemed cruel, even by her current standards of having her dinner stolen by children. "Twist the pasta around the fork, and then put it in your mouth. Chew, swallow, try not to choke." The youngest cub took the first brave attempt, managing to get approximately 2 pieces of pasta onto their utensil through what looked like sheer determination and possibly prayer. They lifted it to their mouth with the caution of someone defusing ordnance, made contact, chewed once. Then their eyes went so wide the human briefly worried about medical complications. "Oh no," the eldest whispered, watching their sibling's face transform. "What's wrong?" The youngest couldn't answer. They were too busy shoveling more pasta into their mouth with the frantic urgency of someone who just discovered oxygen was delicious. The other 2 cubs, seeing this reaction and deciding it probably wasn't poisoning, attacked their own bowls with similar enthusiasm. The human ate her significantly reduced portion and watched 3 young Felnick experience what their species had apparently forgotten was possible. They made sounds. Lots of sounds. The translator kept throwing error messages because purring wasn't supposed to happen during eating, And yet here they were, vibrating with contentment while simultaneously cramming more food into their faces. "This is incredible," the eldest managed between bites, their earlier dignity completely abandoned. "This is what food can be?" "On Earth, yeah. Most places, actually." The human scraped the last bits from her bowl with the resignation of someone who knew this was entirely her fault. Humans never really got on board with the whole nutrition paste thing. Why would anyone eat paste when they could eat this? The middle cub had sauce on their whiskers and absolutely no shame about it. "That's a fantastic question that I've been asking for 4 months. The youngest finished first, having eaten with the subtlety of a natural disaster, and looked at their empty bowl with the profound sadness of someone experiencing loss for the first time. "Is there more?" "No." The human said it firmly, with the authority of someone who knew that yes was a path to disaster. "That's all I made." 3 pairs of enormous eyes turned to her with identical expressions of devastation. "But you'll make it again?" the eldest asked, their voice carrying dangerous amounts of hope. "I made it for myself," the human protested weakly, already knowing she'd lost this argument. "This wasn't supposed to be a group activity." "But you shared it." The youngest's logic was infuriatingly sound. "So you'll share it again. That's how sharing works." Before the human could mount a defense against this reasoning, the door chimed again. Because apparently her evening hadn't achieved maximum chaos yet, and the universe wanted to help. She opened it to find 2 adult Felnick, likely the parents, standing in the corridor with the particular expression of adults who'd been informed their children had vanished from educational services and been tracked to a human's quarters. Behind them stood Station Administrator Kix, a thornback whose species had perfected the art of looking perpetually disappointed. "We received alerts," the administrator began, their translator rendering their clicking speech into flat, accusatory statements. "Atmospheric anomalies, unauthorized energy usage, and 3 cubs who abandoned their education session." The human opened her mouth to respond, but the cubs beat her to it. "She made food," the youngest announced with the enthusiasm of someone revealing a miracle. "Actual food with flavor." The adult Felnick's nose twitched. They smelled it too, the lingering traces of garlic and tomato that the ventilation system was still struggling to process. Their pupils dilated slightly. "What kind of food?" one parent asked, their professional concern warring with something that looked suspiciously like interest. "Human food," the eldest cub supplied helpfully. "She cooked it, with heat and ingredients and everything." Administrator Kix's thorny exterior somehow managed to convey escalating alarm. "You prepared biological matter using thermal energy? In a residential module? Without proper authorization or safety protocols?" "I made pasta," the human said flatly. "It's not a biohazard, it's dinner." "The regulations clearly state." "The regulations didn't account for humans," one of the Felnick parents interrupted, still staring at the heating unit like it was alien technology, which, from their perspective, it absolutely was. "Is this normal for your species?" "Cooking? Yeah, pretty standard. We've been doing it for roughly 500,000 years, give or take." The human crossed her arms. "It's kind of our thing." The administrator pulled up a datapad, their appendages moving with sharp, agitated motions. "There will need to be an inquiry, safety assessments, cultural impact studies. This level of food preparation requires oversight." "Or," the eldest cub interjected with the confidence of youth who'd just discovered leverage, "you could let her keep cooking and we could all benefit from actual food instead of paste." The middle cub nodded enthusiastically. "For research purposes, cross-species dietary cultural exchange. Educational value," the youngest added, because apparently they'd all decided to mount a united front. The administrator looked at the cubs, at the human, at the contraband cooking equipment, and at the 2 adult Felnick who were now edging closer to the pot with barely concealed interest. They made a sound that the translator rendered as profound bureaucratic suffering. "There will be conditions," they finally said. "Documentation, safety reviews, proper ventilation modifications, and absolutely no open flames. I can work with that, the human agreed, because winning by technicality was still winning. And you'll need to increase production. The administrator's tone suggested this wasn't a request. If half the station smells this and can't access it, we'll have civil unrest. The human stared at them. You want me to cook for the entire station? Consider it cultural exchange. Your assignment did specify knowledge sharing. The administrator turned to leave, then paused. And I'll need to sample this pasta, for safety assessment purposes. Naturally. After they all left, the human stood in her quarters surrounded by empty bowls and the wreckage of her peaceful evening. She looked at her contraband equipment, at the remaining ingredients she'd carefully smuggled aboard, at the future stretching before her where apparently she was now the station's unwilling chef. I just wanted dinner, she told the empty room. One meal, that's all I wanted. But somewhere in the station's administrative system, a new file was being created. Human Culinary Cultural Exchange Program. And 3 Felnic cubs were already messaging their friends about the greatest discovery in galactic history. The human sat down, pulled up her personal log, and began typing. Day 123 on Kepler 993. Accidentally started a food revolution. Send help, and more garlic. Her communication console blinked with an incoming message. Then another. Then 7 more in rapid succession. Requests from other modules. Questions about recipe adaptations for different species' digestive systems. A particularly desperate message from the astrophysics department, asking if she could make something called pizza because one of their researchers had read about it in human cultural databases and hadn't stopped talking about it for 3 weeks. The human scrolled through the messages with growing horror. This wasn't just 3 cubs anymore. Word had spread through the station faster than a hull breach, and apparently every being aboard Kepler 993 had suddenly developed opinions about the nutritional paste they'd been eating their entire lives without complaint. She'd been on the station for 4 months trying to figure out how to contribute meaningfully to xenobiological research, how to bridge the gap between human and alien understanding, how to make her presence valuable to the galactic scientific community. Turned out all she'd needed to do was boil some water and add tomatoes. The galaxy had conquered death, disease, and distance. They'd mapped quasars and decoded genetic sequences and built stations that could house 1,000 beings in perfect environmental harmony. But they'd somehow lost something fundamental along the way, something humans had clung to with stubborn irrationality, even as they reached for the stars. They'd forgotten that sometimes the most important discoveries happened in kitchens, not laboratories. That breaking bread together, or pasta, or whatever starch-based staple a species preferred, was how strangers became communities. That food wasn't just fuel. It was culture and comfort and connection, all wrapped up in something you could taste. The human looked at her contraband equipment, now apparently sanctioned for station-wide cultural exchange. She thought about her quiet evening, her one personal meal, her moment of Earth-normal comfort in a galaxy that ran on efficiency. Then she started making a shopping list, because if she was going to accidentally colonize an entire research station with human food culture, she was going to need significantly more garlic.